All right.
I like your background, Jay. What is that from?
It's Doctor Strange.
Yeah, that's
Oh. Okay.
The mystic, whatever. His
Fortress
house
of
is called.
Solidarity, or
That's Superman. I hate
it's a
Superman.
Fortress of Solitude. I like supervillains. Anyways, what's up, everybody? My name is Indy, and that gentleman right next to me in Doctor Strange's murder basement is Jay Powell.
It's his murder attic.
Murder addict is Jay Powell from Powell Group Consulting, and welcome to Indie Game Business. Today we've got special guest Andrew Pappas with us, and we're going to talk about community building to help your game succeed before publishing, self-publishing, and then whatever other topics that end up happening. You guys know how it is. It'll be a good show. It'll be fun.
Once again, our highly organized and well thought out podcast.
Yeah, highly organized, well thought out podcast. You gotta say it really fast, like the ads on the radio. It's a highly organized, well thought out podcast.
So, Andrew, welcome to our highly thought out, well, whatever podcast. So, it's Friday. You know,
it is Friday.
We always start at the same place. Tell us how you got into the industry and walk us through your career to this point. And obviously then tell us what you actually do for a living too.
Yeah, sure. Well, first off, thank you guys so much for having me. It's great to be on the show and just love what you guys are doing, sharing all this awesome information with great people in the community. So what I do, or where I started. So traditionally, you know, I'll give the quick abbreviated version of my history. Went to school to be a film student, and while doing that and thinking, you know, as an indie filmmaker, you really got to learn how to, you know, market yourself. So from there, I started a career in marketing and haven't really looked back since. But growing up, I've always been a big fan of games. Grew up with the NES, some Atari, like just almost every console. And so always been very passionate about games. And then it wasn't until probably about 4 or 5 years ago where I started realizing that, you know, I have quite an extensive background in marketing, working with all these different agencies and everything like that, where I can totally apply that to, you know, the game space. And in particular, one that really resonated with me and one that I wanted to be part of the community of more was the indie game space. So that's essentially, you know, when 5 years ago, when Rengen Marketing was born, where just out there helping other people get further insight and help with, you know, their marketing and what things to consider as an indie dev as you are out there, you know, promoting your game and making your game. So that's a nutshell.
So, I mean, nobody has a direct way into the industry. And that's why we always like asking, you know, it's like, so
it's very indirect.
Tell us about the podcast too. I mean, so where did the podcast fall into all this? Is that more of a hobby thing? Is that something that you do with Rengen? Where does that fit in? And what kind of stuff do you talk about there?
Yeah. So, indie game movement, kind of started after about a year or so after Rengen. And I mean, to be quite honest, there's a few things about it. Well, first and foremost, as I mentioned about community, and that's something that's really important to me, I really wanted like to show in a different way of how I could contribute in doing back to the community, the indie dev community. And one thing that I thought was important with the podcast too was thinking of ways like, you know, there's a lot of information out there and you know, there's a lot of helpful information out there. But sometimes I think, you know, just having a different approach and allowing people to maybe see things differently or hear things differently from, you know, other indie devs and such can be that much more beneficial, especially if you're listening to people that are in that same moment that others are, that listeners are. So part of the reason for putting together Indie Game Movement was simply to just really contribute and provide more value to the community. The other side of it too is, you know, just creating more awareness about, you know, myself and, you know, Rengen Marketing in terms of what we're doing. But that's really a very much side note about it. There are on occasions like quick mentions that I might make about, you know, things that Rengen does, but it's really focused on the guests, what they're doing for the community, and just providing that helpful information and to all our listeners. So It's just out of want and to be a part of the community and help them out.
But that's a huge part. And it's one of those things that people don't think about when they're building their game. They think about marketing their game, and they don't always think about, okay, so where does this figure, where's this personal brand come in? Where does the bigger, picture fit in, and building that whole, online persona. And we used to call it, establishing yourself as an expert. That's why you go and you speak at at conferences, and, you write blog posts and do feature articles and things like that. It's all about building yourself as, an expert in that space. And so, that's basically, that's what you're doing with the podcast. Quite frankly, that's part of what we do with this podcast. Yeah, we're getting out information, that's good for people to have. But at the same time, you are building your personal brand, and developers need to do that as well. Podcasts are fairly, low friction ways of getting your name out there and promoting your message, in a lot of ways. So, I get it.
We got someone saying hi to you in the chat there. Nalin Savara, great going, Jay. Greetings from India to you and Andrew Pappas. Forgot about me. Jesus, rude. I forgot about me. I'm here too, right? I was one of the attendees at the Indian Game Developer Conference where Jay Powell spoke in 2019.
Oh, well,
awesome.
Good to see you here. Thanks. I love that. That was like my favorite trip last year. It was awesome, mainly because of the food. But the show was good too. But a lot of because of the food. So, what are, when you're talking with indie teams, it's something that we focus on more and more now is telling these teams, okay, you can't wait until you are at beta or you're looking for a publisher or, right, whatever milestone close to completion you're looking at. We've seen, and I've been doing this 20 some years. I still get people that call me and go, oh, so we're launching our game next month and we have no marketing budget. What can we do? And I'm like, find a god, pray. Doesn't matter which one. Just pick one.
Throw $2 million.
Yeah, exactly. Go buy some scratch offs. There we go. That's a good idea. But the reality is, in today's market, you have to be building that community and building that, brand recognition from day one. So what are some of the struggles that you see developers with? What are some of the easy ways that they can go and start getting, acclimated to this and start building that community?
Yeah, and you make a lot of good points, and from like the let's say the struggle standpoint, because a lot of times, like when you have developers that I've spoken with, there's a lot of pain points that come up, and some of which might seem straightforward, and others might not be as apparent. For example, a straightforward one being like, well, I'm developing my game, and I don't really have many things, assets, whatever, or trailer that I can share right now. So the question is always like, when should I start? And that's kind of a big one. Another one too is just the idea of marketing as a whole can be very overwhelming. And then it's not necessarily when to start, but the question becomes where to start. And that one is more of like kind of a psychological one to some extent, because then you start getting all this fear and uncertainty, and then you start playing the what if game, and then all these other factors start happening. So those are probably the problems and the struggles that I see a lot of, just some of that I see the indie devs face, before talking to them. And then just kind of ways to counter that is, obviously it's easy to say like be creative or think outside of the box, but like a more pragmatic way of doing it is like, well, just the best advice that I typically give people is like, well, look at everything that you're doing as an asset that you can promote or share. And what do I mean by that? Specifically, like you could take, if you're working on very basic concept art, why don't you promote that? Share it with the community. There's different communities out there that really gravitate towards that stuff, towards that particular style. I mean, or if you already are working with a musician, or even if it's a very rough development, I mean, come on, we see this on Twitter all the time where people are like, I just made a title screen, right? But depending on your level of engagement and everything else that you're doing, you can get a lot of feedback from that, and it's helpful from that standpoint, from a feedback one, but you're also getting exposure, you're getting noticed. And yes, you might not have much of a following or anything at that point, but the fact that you're simply taking action and going from there is really valuable in itself. So those are the problems that I see, but also just little quick things, especially when really early and starting out, that you can start doing. And obviously there's a whole lot more you can kind of grow from there. But the thing I tell people too is it's really about taking steps by steps, determining your audience, what are the next best steps that also work for you, so you're not overburdening yourself, and also focusing on your game, and then slowly set those processes in place and scale from there. And then you can get a system going and working towards all these other things up until prior to you're talking with either partnerships, publishers, or even self-publishing.
So, and you bring up the thing about people posting their title page to Twitter, and it's, yeah, it is something we see a lot of, and we do tell people it's like the minute you have something to show it.
Exactly.
But how do you stand out from everybody else that's showing it? Because Twitter is just, I mean, there's a ton of noise and little signal. How do you know people? How do you get people to look at your title screen?
Yeah, no, great question. Because I mean, well, and the reason why I always like lead with that with people is simply because it's just as important to get in the habit and of just doing those tasks. Because if you don't start doing it now, it's going to be that much harder to do it later. And then you fast forward, you could come to the scenario you were talking about before, where it's like, hey, I have a game, it's going to launch, and can you help me? And usually the answer is probably no, because there's just so much to do at that point. But how do you get noticed? Like, okay, yeah, I put my title screen out there, and okay, I don't get anything out of it. So what do you do to get noticed? Well, there's a lot of things. Now, I'm not going to lie, these types of things take work. And what I mean by work, for let's say this example of you put your title screen on Twitter and you're looking for engagement, people to comment on it. What it really comes down to, if you're boiling it down to one thing, is how are you providing value? Because I think what a lot of people do too is when they're, and I think that's part of the problem too that some devs struggle with, is when they're putting it out there, like, well, it's about me, and they're very passive about it, and they don't want to be more like direct or clear with what they want people to do. So overcoming that hurdle is an important one too. And the best way to overcome it is you're not just talking about you, but you're finding ways to provide value to the community, because you're essentially going to be creating a community, or your game itself should have some type of community around it. So what things are you doing to provide value to them? So instead of simply just posting a picture, why don't you, a good thing that people can do is go out, engage with the community, find out, who you're reaching out to. And not just arbitrarily, understanding, and a key thing, and we probably hear it all the time, but it's so important, is understanding your audience. And if you know who your audience is, what type of messaging or what type of things you can say that will resonate with them, that they like, that's just going to make things more effective. So at the end of the day, if you really want that type of engagement or activity of people commenting or liking your title screen, you also have to show value, like how you can provide value for them. And another way to frame that too is, when people go on Twitter, think of what is the reason they're going to Twitter for. Is it to be, shouted out to, or is it going to be that they might want to like relax, or just look at their feed and comment on things? So if you're doing things that is going to resonate with the people and the reasons why they're going to that platform for this example, then you're more likely to get those engagements. But it's going to take time. You have to learn how to resonate with that audience and keep and keep that consistency going. And then over time, you're going to start seeing that type of activity where, hey, I'm getting like 20 whatever likes on my title screen, and then the next day I got more, or my next post also got that type of attention. And those are probably the best ways to stand out. And there's a lot of different ways you can go about getting that type of engagement. I mean, there's polls, you could use other images, you could use emoji. Like there's so many different things and that have been, well documented on the web too. And a lot of other indie devs, I know, I can't remember the guest's last name, but I think it was episode 125 of the Indie Game Movement podcast. His name is Nicholas, Blue Goo Games. He made a whole video about 50 tips on what you can do for Twitter. So there's just a lot of different ways that at the core of it that you can find ways to engage with your audience and really provide them value. Because if you're doing that, that's how you're going to stand out.
So outside of Twitter, what have you seen, what other platforms work for building this with developers?
Yeah, so there's definitely a bunch out there. So obviously there's Reddit, and that one can be a little fickle. It can kind of be a double-edged sword.
Yes.
And so, but with that in mind, I mean, the best things and this is kind of an approach that I pretty much tell everybody with just about anything, because the channel in itself doesn't necessarily matter with some caveats, right? So the main one being, let's say Reddit. If we know that there's tons of subreddits, which is basically other variations of an audience that you can target, you just want to make sure that our audience is in line, either with your game, or is going to resonate with the style that you have or whatever, and even some affinities. So there's Reddit, and then there's Imgur, or whatever it's called.
Imgur?
Imgur, okay. And then that's another one too, where and then the other thing that I tell people too is, outside of making sure that it's in the appropriate subreddit, it's the appropriate audience, you also want to see, like, look at what other people are posting, see what resonates really well, and then try things out. I wouldn't necessarily completely copy a style of post from someone else, like, word for word, but like you can definitely emulate some of those things and just put your own approach or twist on it, and then work from there. It's really the best thing that you can do. And obviously there's a lot of other content that you can get other insight and information from, but also, like, outside of seeing what other people are doing, talk to other people. If you're seeing that those individuals are doing really well at that, try to find out some reasons why, but don't necessarily reach out to someone who's really big and well established already too, because they're going to be approaching it from perspective of now and looking back to then. Find the other indie devs like yourself that are starting out, that are making some good traction, that are kind of at the same point you are, or just slightly above where you want to be, because those are probably going to be the most helpful type of people you can get information from.
Reddit is... Oh, God, yeah. I've tried to post there. I had an AMA there last year that actually hit like the top trending, but it's like I post other stuff there and it just like completely gets ignored. And so, I mean, Reddit's one of those that if somebody could come in and sit down with me for a couple of hours and say, this is how you Reddit properly, I would be eternally grateful, because I ain't figured it out yet. But it is one of those. It's like, it depends on which exact subreddit you're in out of all these other subreddits, and then what time of day you post it. Because it never fails. Yep. I always have some brilliant idea to post to Reddit like at 10 o'clock at night. And I'm like, no one's going to see this.
If you post on Reddit and everyone tells you you're wrong, then you've done a good job.
Well, that happens in my daily life too. So, but it's one of those that I feel like it is a great opportunity, because we're trying to post stuff that people are going to learn from. And it's like one of the ones, it was right after we first launched our publisher list, and I posted it to Reddit. Now I knew, because to get our publisher list, you had to put in your email address. I knew that was going to get like from Reddit. So I said, hey, look, you're going to need your email address. I mean, because quite frankly, we set it up originally because we got so many requests for that thing in like a week on LinkedIn that I just could not manage it anymore. And I said, but at the same time, if you want to, distribute the full list somewhere else, I don't care, as long as you give, credit for us putting it together. That's all I ask. And there was some person on there that's like, I mean, we're talking about a list of, at that time it was only like 500 publishers broken down by broken down by platform. And somebody's like, oh, this list is like completely worthless. It's like, I want to know the games that they've published and what their average reviews are. It's like this list. I'm like, yeah,
that would be a list you would have to pay a lot.
Yes,
for.
It's like, that's literally what we get paid to do. I'm giving you a list so you realize that there's more than 20 publishers out there that you can go to. And yeah, somebody's like all indignant because we don't have like deep dive Nielsen media level stats on, all these publishers. That was probably the one where I was like, you know what? I'm done. I'm finished. I respond to people and chime in on other people's threads on occasion, but it's like, I obviously don't understand how to post to Reddit, and we're done with that. That's it. I'm done. So if you're out there and you're listening and you have, you can teach me how to properly Reddit, message me. So there are, there's so many different ways. So one that was recommended to me that I had never thought of until, this person recommended it was Pinterest. Have you ever?
Yeah. I haven't, but I have talked to some people like highly interested in Pinterest and Instagram as well. And I mean, well, I'll let you continue because I'm curious, because I have some ideas on that, but myself, I haven't really looked into that even more just to see what the possibilities are. But I definitely could see some opportunities depending on, what the game is and other avenues.
Well, I mean, Instagram and now TikTok, they're both, what I consider like the no-brainers for indie devs, because the whole medium is about showing art or photos or something visual. And that's what plays to, helping game devs. You want somebody to see a screenshot or a GIF or something that catches their eye and they go, wait, what's this? It's much easier to do that than if you have a thing on Twitter and all that sort of stuff. But I had never thought about Pinterest until, it was mentioned to me. So I'm always now trying to figure out, has anyone tried this? Has anyone actually had success doing a Pinterest board for your indie game?
Interest in Pinterest.
Yeah, no, interest in Pinterest. No, I think it poses a good question. And like I said, I don't know of anybody who has tried it or whatever, but on occasion, those, thoughts cross my mind and like, well, what are good ways to approach that? And the first and foremost thing too, especially because, there could be like a lot of different platforms popping up. There could be some down the road that we haven't really considered much now, but then later. And I always go back to it probably comes down to defining or understanding who's the audience there, who are the people that are there. Because when you say Pinterest, that like first thing in my mind is, well, I love it when I get these texts from these craft ideas from my wife saying, hey, look, you can make this, honey. And then I'm like, well, okay, so there's probably a lot of women on there sharing recipes or anybody sharing recipes and projects and things like that. So but at the same time, it's like, even regardless of where the a popular audience is within that platform, it's also to consider of, hey, like you were mentioning, like there could, like, if there's a lot of artists and stuff and because it's so art related, there's segments there, and there's probably, and if you think about it, they're probably not going to be as big as, what you see on Twitter or like other channels. So at the very least, that means that the saturation there is, it's nowhere near as diluted. So it could present a lot of other opportunities. So the only thing that I always say when people are like coming to me about these, like, let's say if they come to me with a platform I never heard of, I'll be like, know your audience, know if they're there, then test it. And that's the best thing that you can do.
Read the room.
So yeah, that's my
Read the room.
yeah, read the room.
So as we're talking about this, I'm sitting here on my computer, actually going to Pinterest and, seeing what's in here as, in terms of games. Oh wait, now I have to tell it what I'm interested in. This is gonna, yeah. All right, never mind. All right, I just lost interest.
What you're interested in?
Yeah, I know. It's like I have my
Into
old account. All right. So, but one thing you said just right there is our connotation and our immediate assumption when somebody goes, "Oh, did you see it on Pinterest?" is either home design, cooking, or crafts. That's like immediately. So you would think a game like Cooking Mama or Stardew Valley or any of these games that actually have themes in them built around that would be kind of like a no-brainer for Pinterest.
Right. And you're going in a really good direction here, because actually this morning I was talking to someone. He was asking me questions about educational video games, right? So if you think about and I gave him some quick insight in terms of in one direction you go for that particular topic was reach out to mommy bloggers, because they have this huge network. They're talking about depending on what they talk about, different things. They're very oriented, focused and stuff. So on that same note though, either an educational game or something along that line that can really cater to that particular crowd that you listed, like cooking, home design, things along those lines. So if you have a game that really can cater to the behavior or the interest of that particular audience, then like you said, that then becomes a no-brainer. So it really comes down to knowing who's on there, what other interests and things like that are, and then seeing could my product fit in with that lifestyle. And I mean, this can go into a lot of other crazy stuff too. And it's not, I mean, if you can do it, if you can make the time for it, great. But understanding your audience in terms of persona, things like that, and personas, it's not just demographic data, but it's also getting into what does this person's day-to-day life look like? What kind of magazines do they read? And a lot of people don't like to think that granularly about their audience, but what that does is it can create either a main person or a couple people that consist of your core audience. So then your messaging and everything else is consistent. But if you're, like I said, you don't have to go crazy, but if you at least start thinking about and what that audience is, what their lifestyle is, then you can start really exploring and considering other platforms such as Pinterest, as we just, pretty much gave an example of.
Okay, I am going to call somebody out on this and see if they're still in the chat, because one, as we were talking about before the launch, or maybe I don't know, after we started the show, where we're talking about getting the Pitch Your Game channel up on our Discord server. So Indie Game Lover is the one that did that, told me how to do it, and I saw them pop in here earlier. If you're still there, give me a shout out, because they have a Pinterest page. As I went in and I got into Pinterest and I searched for indie game, the Indie Game Lover Pinterest page came up. And so obviously, we're not alone. We're not completely off on this. There are indie games out there. I mean, I see immediately, whole Pinterest boards about top 10 indie games of 2020 and character art, a lot of art on here. Minecraft houses. So yeah, I mean, I didn't realize there was this much indie game stuff on Pinterest. That's something I would absolutely look into then, because you're not going to have as big of that, signal to noise ratio anymore, because it's not something that's completely flooded with content.
Yeah. And when you said all these boards that are popping up that are showing artwork, if you think about that, I mean, that's catering to one particular audience. Now, maybe they might not necessarily be all, gamers or into games, but it can provide like an introduction to that. And basically anybody who's doing that style of artwork for their game, whether it's concept art or anything else, that basically then gives you an in for a particular crowd, even though it might not be catering to like, the overall like cooking and the other examples that we provided before too. So what it comes down to is how you approach it can give you an opportunity into like new platforms, and then thus, giving you other channels, other ways to, slowly start building that community.
All right. Is this working, Indy? Or
Yeah.
am I flashing like it's flashing on my screen?
It's flashing.
Okay. I don't know how to fix that.
Yeah.
All right. That's really annoying. I'm not going to do that. I was trying to share the screen and say, okay, look, here's all this cool stuff that's on Pinterest. But yeah, I don't want to be triggering people's seizures and things like that. So yeah, I mean, that's a good aspect of it. But you brought up, so you brought up mommy bloggers. And that's one of the things that we have often, pointed to, not just mommy bloggers, but specialist bloggers, niche communities that aren't necessarily in games. Because, the world around us now, most everybody is a gamer. 10 years ago, 15 years ago, you could say, okay, well, gamers are 18 to 24-year-old males. They weren't really back then, but that was the perception. But now they're really not. I mean, the majority of gamers are on mobile. They're not even console and PC players. They're on mobile. And so you start looking at, how big the market is out there, and there's a ton of niche community. So,
yeah,
using the mommy bloggers as an example, how do you go about, finding these little niche communities, and then more importantly, getting them interested in and sucking them into your Discord or wherever you're aggregating all these people?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think I feel like just everything comes back to this, but really thinking about, who you're approaching, right? And what's your intent, but also understanding like how can this be, how can I provide value? So it's not just about you being like, hey, here's my game. I think you and your audience would absolutely love it. But like going into more like, where else can you provide value there? But at least showcasing or identifying that, hey, like, I think this is something that your audience would like. And to do that too, you want to figure out on their site and everything, like what kind of conversations are they having, what kind of blog posts and things like that. So yeah, it's a little bit of work, but I think doing that extra work goes a long way. And in terms of finding these people, kind of what we outlined already with like the Pinterest idea, you can go through Pinterest and have a whole access of basically people who post there that already are on these like mommy blogs or have their own blogs and things like that. There's that. And if you know that like, hey, I think our game can have an affinity audience with cooking, you could look up, I swear, if you look up anything recipe related online, the top results outside of maybe a couple of mainstream publications are all going to be from like, various mommy bloggers or depending on what you're looking for type thing. So there's a lot of different ways you can do it. And I'm sure there's probably some Reddit posts out there too with a whole list of all these things too. So there's a lot of ways to do some research to probably scale the process that other people have already done it as well. And then just, have the right intent and make sure that you're providing value in that sense where, because as you said, like a lot of people of these channels, as long as you have a decent understanding and know that the right people to approach, then just put your messaging in there so it's really defining that value and you can get that, because it's really a similar process to how you would reach out to an influencer or how you would reach out to the press a little bit. You want to understand that who they're talking to, the audience that they're talking to is going to be in line with what they talk about and who they're talking to.
Okay, so very good point in the fact that it all draws back to understanding who to go for. There's a marketing term that you and I know, but that a lot of developers aren't going to know, your marketing persona. Talk about how you build that marketing persona, because that's exactly what you're talking about. You've got to figure out who you're actually selling to, and that's why you need a marketing persona. So talk a bit about that. What is it, and how do you build one?
Yeah, so marketing persona, it kind of goes back to what we were, what I mentioned earlier is like building up that persona, and basically and it's not directly the same, but it's very similar to what sometimes is called an avatar. And what you're doing is you're trying to identify, if I were to take this whole entire audience that I'm looking to target and group it into a single person, who is that? And then so you're basically, you can give this person a name and then what they do for work and things along those lines. And what that does is gives you a key representative idea of like kind of an embodiment of that audience, and knowing this is who I'm talking to. If this is like my ideal gamer or whatever for this game, this is the person I would have a conversation with. And what it really does is put you in their mind, and their mindset, what they're going to do. And what's really cool is when you go through all that work to producing that, and the work meaning, like, as I outlined a little bit before, like, what do they read? What are their activities? Who do they hang out with? How often do they hang out with them? Do they go to restaurants? What kind of restaurants? All that stuff. But when you boil it all down into the single person and really know them very well, then it's cool, because what will happen is, from your messaging that you create, because now you know exactly who you're talking to, you're potentially going to have the ability to say things to people, and they're not even realizing that, like, they could read something from you, or like, wow, they knew exactly what I meant or what I really liked, and they provided everything with it for me in this game, or what they said that they were what they were talking about really resonates with me because it totally aligns. So you're almost, in a way, when you go through that process, able to somewhat predict what people are going to say or what's going to resonate with them. And that's like the really key important thing of going through that process, creating that, marketing persona, essentially.
So yeah, you might have seen me chuckling. I wasn't laughing at you, but I had an idea that I just, my typical brain. So, like you said, when you're building a marketing persona, you're actually building people. This is,
Yeah.
Susie. If you're in the U.S. and you've seen like the Peyton Manning insurance commercials where he's built that whole thing in his garage and it's a whole city and he knows the life story of every little model in there, that's what you're doing basically.
Yeah.
And bear with me while I wipe my eye here. So we could build, let's say, 5 or 6 marketing personas. This is Jill. This is Tim. Tim sells insurance. Jill is a lawyer downtown who, got barely through undergrad school and then got into a prestigious law school because her parents paid for her to get in. You can really go into all this detail. So we need to make like 5 or 6 marketing personas and then do a D&D session with them. That's what I was laughing at, because that came right in my head. It's like, we're going to do something useful with these marketing personas that, it doesn't, because the first time I saw one, I can't remember how many years ago it was, when I was first introduced to the concept of a marketing persona, but I get it. And this has all these details about this person. And I'm like,
yeah.
This is nuts. It's like,
Yeah.
What? How? But then you realize that, that actually has value and you're doing it for a reason.
Right.
And my eyes are talk amongst yourselves for a minute.
Yeah, well, to kind of play off of that too, I think it's really another way you can probably go about doing it, because everything that we outlined and stuff, it can be work intensive and can be difficult to do, especially if it's all new to you, right? But that aside, another good way of doing that is if, and I see some devs do this too, where what type of questions are you asking when you have people play testing your game? If you really can develop a good rapport with people, and some type of relationship, then even asking other questions that you might not typically, ask a complete stranger can kind of fill in the gaps a little bit of kind of building that persona. Because after you talk to so many people and asking questions like, hey, how did this make you feel, or whatever? Oh, and by the way, what do you do for work, or whatever? And just be casual about it. You can kind of then start building a persona from those interactions too. So there are other ways that you can approach it and kind of create something. Because I know some agencies, you're right, they have this huge long list of just every single little detail, and it's almost like this is a real person I'm talking to.
That's your neighbor.
And yeah, and then watch you create one of those, and some guy comes out and he's like, "You're totally like, where'd you get my info? It's like totally raw." And it's like, no, that's just our persona. We did, but still, the reality of it is you know, a lot of us aren't going to be getting to that point. If you can, great, but if not, there's other ways to approach it.
It is a fun exercise though. If you come down to it and you're like, you really get in a role play mind, and it's like, okay, why is this person going to take time out of her day when she's got, you know, her new law firm she's starting and she's trying to grow a family? Right. And why is she going to play our game? If you role play those out, you can get some very, very good
insight.
Yeah, I got something. Yeah. No, it's just y'all are driving me to tears today. It's you can get some really good insights, and it opens up that's where you come up with things like pictures. And Peter, you know, from XS up in Canada, I think Peter, you're in Canada. I'm pretty sure you're in Canada. He just posted that they have a Pinterest page and they get like over 2,000 views a month on it. And it's just game art. You go to their page and it's linked there in the chat on the LinkedIn side anyway.
Yeah.
And it's, you know, models and things like that from art.
Yeah. And even from that alone, like, let's say you establish a relationship with someone like him or someone else, or partnership, whatever. And it's like, then now that's another network. You can like showcase that. It's like, hey, we're working with so-and-so, and they already have a huge following there. And it's just another way to just help out the rest of the community. And it's also going to benefit you in the long run. So there's like so many different ways you can go about it. And it still comes down to like really understanding, you know, what the audience is, what the persona is, and things along that, and different ways that the community can interact. Because if you think about it, this community as a whole, indie games or gaming in general, is all very media rich. So there's so many different communities that you can think outside of the box with, and you know, benefit each other and yourself.
So we have a comment in here from Zero Vapor on Twitch, says, I'm curious how company image deals with building pre-release communities.
Andrew? Yeah, no, I'm just trying to like how company image deals. I guess that's the part I'm not following. But in terms of like
the perception of your company, how, you know.
Oh, I got you. Like
that sort of image, not like an art image.
Oh, right. Okay. Maybe I was just taking it too literally there, but like your own company image, right? Yeah. And how you do that. I mean, I think that just comes down to a little bit, as well as like, you know, how you represent yourself, and what are your values and things like that. So like building those communities too. I mean, that's really what it does. I think just recently we talked to Victoria Tron a little bit about that.
She's awesome, by the way.
Yeah. And just, you know, knowing how you want to represent yourself as a company, as an entity. And it's a really good thing to think about, because a lot of times, and that's another thing that I've noticed in some situations with devs, is they go out there and they're thinking, hey, I'm just really focused on my game. And it's like, well, what do you want to do outside of your game? Because when you're forming these partnerships and everything else, people look at you in terms of, well, what's your 5-year plan? This is your first game? Great. What else are you going to be making? And if people don't really think about that path, it can make it a little bit more challenging for these people that you're looking to work with or receive help from to really kind of like buy into everything that you're doing. You could still have a great game, but they also want to know that there's something, you know, potentially sustainable, because one, that they're looking for long-term relationships too. But also for you as an entity, do you just want to make one game, or do you want to make more? But like going back, you know, just think, and the reason why I talked about that on a little side tangent there is because it still goes back to, what are your core values? How do you want to be represented? And that carries over to your community too. So establishing those things first and knowing how you really want to be represented is going to then carry over. And if you to your community, and your community is going to respect that, because they also want like clarity too, and an understanding of, okay, I'm coming here for that. And the reason why Victoria Tron is so good to hear what she has shared with everybody about that, and even Tanya X Short, is because of that whole process that they went through with Kit Fox, and getting those, and really thinking hard about that. Because if you talk to any other community members, they're going to say how much they absolutely love them, and it's because part of the main reason why they do is because of how they really outlined those values and made sure that they carried them through in creating such an awesome community.
And yeah, all right, so this is going to lead into dangerous territory, but especially now. So as a, I want to talk about a lot here, COVID and, the assaults on Twitter, and there was something else that's going on that I've just completely lost my train of thought on. Anyway, so
Mixer.
Something that I hear from, friends of mine who have real world companies, is they are literally in this conundrum right now of face masks in their store or in their business or whatever, because it's like, I had one of them tell me the other day, it's like, if I mandate face masks, I'm going to get, destroyed on social media. If I don't, I'm also going to get destroyed on social media. The same is true for, the Black Lives Matter. There are companies that came out really quick in support, issued a statement. There are some groups that didn't issue a statement and got, vilified for not doing it. And then there's the ones, like Activision, that released a statement, even though immediately their whole feed was full of, screenshots of the highly racist and offensive, usernames that people in Call of Duty have been using for years, and Activision has never done shit to stop it. When you're cultivating that image, and now we're seeing everything from Twitch to developers to publishers dealing with a lot of these issues that have gone on for years but are just now coming out and coming to the surface again. From a marketing standpoint, how do you deal with that?
Yeah, you asked a loaded question, didn't you?
Oh, yeah, I did. It's cool. I didn't give you any prep on it either.
No. It's really important, and it's a really important a question to ask and to consider. And the way I would kind of go about it, and I've even or I forget which episode, but it was the one with Victoria Tron and my producer Mustafa Price, where we were talking about like inclusion, and Black Lives Matter was definitely part of that conversation. And I mean, I think what it comes down to from a marketing perspective is being not just empathetic, but listening and learning. Because part of what we talked about was pretty much the same thing that you just asked. How do you come forward and approach this? Because what I identified it as, you have people that are looking at it one way, where unfortunately they might be looking at it strictly from an opportunity perspective. So more self-serving. And I would see not too many people are doing that, but they can, but they're trying to make their intent look like it's genuine. But because if it's just simply out of the blue and they haven't done anything up until that moment, it's going to come out as self-serving. So it's not necessarily saying that these people are specifically doing this from an opportunity perspective, but it can be viewed that way. So the best way to, I would say, approach it for anybody who does want to get involved, especially from a marketing standpoint, is first understand the issues that people are facing. So with Black Lives Matter, like, do your research, find out like why there's been so much oppression over the years, or what they've really been going through. Because once you have a better understanding, then you're going to have a better position on where you feel about that and how it represents, your values as a whole. Because at the end of the day, everything that's being talked about is that, like, we're all human and we all want to be treated the same and everything. But before you can but because especially now with this particular movement, if you're not a part of it, or in terms of if you haven't experienced anything that a lot of these other people have, then you don't necessarily have a right off the bat to make an approach, to make it a statement. So then the next thing to do is, after you learn more about it, or while you're learning more and you really want to do something, then amplify those voices, because then it's going to help you learn more about what's going on, and you're going to help other people learn more about it too. One example that I did provide too that I thought was great, and someone who I actively listened to, probably one of the best examples I've seen out there. It's not game oriented, but Pat Flynn from Smart Passive Income podcast. And what he and his team did, they issued a statement, said, hey, look, like, they canceled one of their podcasts and said, we're not going to do anything right now. We're going to put the forefront on amplifying, Black Lives Matter's voices. And then when they came back, they sent out another email saying to people, hey, we met with the whole entire team because this is something we care about, and everything else. And we went through this process. They outlined what the process was, and then that they're going to even start making changes and everything else. So they pretty much, everything that they said, they were following through. Then they feature a podcast that were like, we really want to learn more and get it from, this community's directly. So the whole episode was dedicated to, Black entrepreneurs giving their statements and ideas on things. So the point being here, in terms of from a marketing perspective and how you would able to really apply that, is understand, learn what's going on, amplify it, and then actually take actions that are going to show that intent and that you really care, and make it a change for the long run, because it still goes back to your core values of how you are as a company and stuff, and how that reflects the rest of your community, how that can really be inclusive for everybody and align with that, and also setting those boundaries too, so that way if there's any anybody who's toxic in their behavior, then you can set those boundaries and expectations so you eliminate that, and then really garner and take that right approach to it.
And it is important. I think that's like the one thing that we take away from any of this stuff, as much as, and whether it's the Black Lives Matter or, women being assaulted at conferences and the COVID crisis or whatever, you can't ignore it.
Right.
That's what, will get you, in trouble more than anything else, because that some of the most vocal, people that I've seen are not necessarily criticizing a specific way that people are doing it, but a lot of times it's just like, I cannot believe that you have not said anything about this. And it's like, obviously the bigger your organization, the more influential your organization,
right,
the more that's going to happen. But it's something that you got to be prepared to address. And another thing is, there's a lot of companies in the industry right now that are finding out that, that they've got people that they're either working with or that work with them that, are part of these problems. And it is, I don't throw it out there because it's like an easy answer. It's not,
Yeah.
But it's one of those things that you can't just kind of sit back in the corner and say, oh, I'm not getting involved with this. Who was it? Somebody made some big store or brand or something said they weren't going to get involved with the face mask thing because they didn't want to get drawn into a political debate. And that just was the way wrong answer. This is kind of like a health thing. It's not necessarily, but it is a political thing. And, we're fortunate in the fact that we work in an industry that's global. It's like, I literally have international phone calls and video calls every single day. And, it's like all week I've been talking to teams in Latin America because I'm doing the big conference down there. And it's one of those things that, this isn't, they look at us and they're like, so what's the concern about COVID? And I was like, the problem is whether or not you wear a mask seems to come down to which political party you support, not science or health or anything. It's like, well, I'm not going to wear one because the president says I don't need one, or I am going to wear one because I can't stand the president. And it's like, none of that is relevant. That's not why you need to be doing it. But it's something that, I always get the funniest looks from a lot of these countries, overseas. They're like, seriously? And I'm like, oh yeah. Welcome to America. So, I mean, you got to be ready to make a statement on it. But at the same time, and I want to emphasize this, you're not always going to make the right decision on how to handle it,
Right.
But communication, like you said, like that's the best you can do, because one, you're not always going to say the right thing. And two, most of the time, there's not necessarily a clear cut answer. I mean, this is the age of the internet. Everybody's going to have an argument one way or another. I can, tell you the sky's blue, and somebody on Twitter or Facebook will argue that with me. We have flat earthers, for God's sakes. So,
and if I were to add to that too, I think the main thing is it's important to come out and say something, but also don't be reactive with your reaction, because everything that's going on takes a lot of processing, regardless of if you're an entity, a company, or an individual. Everybody has a different level of how they're going to process that. And when they get to a point too, that's why it's important to give yourself time, whoever you may be, before you come out. Because if you're being reactive, I mean, we've seen some of the stories, I'm sure, where, people lost their jobs over stuff. And if they really thought about, like, what does this mean and stuff, or how should I, come forward with something in terms of where it aligns with my values and everything, that's going to be probably the most appropriate route for everyone.
I was reading a comment and I couldn't figure out where it came from. Oh, it's Peter. Peter's not in Canada. My bad. You're nice, and that's why I assumed you're Canadian, Peter. It's just a reflex for me. It is one of those things that you're never going to be able to say the right thing. You do have to communicate. You have to listen, like you said, because you're not in that same place. You don't live in the same, world and circumstances that a lot of other people do. And so you can't just take your reality and drop it into somebody else's and say, right, oh, well, I don't know why you did this. And it's like, well, it's not your fucking world. This is not.
It's kind of one of those things, like, no matter what you post online, you're going to be wrong to somebody.
Oh, God, yeah.
I mean? Yeah, exactly.
Probably the majority of people, but that's beside the point. Yes. I'm still waiting for all the, feedback on this show and how I'm wrong about all the advice I give. All you got to do is
just post it on Reddit. And
I did. I had a guy, this is bringing it full circle. I had a guy on Reddit told me, if I was talking about advice for finding a publisher or something, along the lines of what I do every single day and what I've done for every single day for 20 some years. And he's like, well, I think you're absolutely wrong, and I'm just not going to listen to you. And I'm like, okay.
All right. Thanks for letting me know.
These aren't laws that I throw out. You don't have to listen to me. I just, I have
their
done
perspective
this
from experience.
Yes, yeah. I've done this for a while. I kind of know what's going to happen. But yeah, so, going back to Reddit and how I don't half understand that platform. Yep, did. Had a guy on Reddit tell me I was completely wrong. So, so, we're up against, we've already gone an hour, but it doesn't seem like we've gone an hour here.
No, this is just like,
if you out there, we usually, throw this out sooner, but I'm just now remembering, if you've got questions on how you build this community, why it's important, and this is something we've talked about before, so you should grasp it from our conversations. But if you've got questions about it, toss it in chat on Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, Twitch. We'll see it. And either me, Dan, or Andrew will answer it live for you in front of everybody. What else? It's an ongoing thing. You have to be, building your brand as well as, marketing the game that you're talking about. where else does this all factor in? I mean, so are there any other good tips? Somebody just Zero Vapor just said, what good tools do you use for community management?
Yeah. So for tools that I know of off the top of my head, Hootsuite, there's Sprout Social, I think it's Sprout. And one that I started using, it's actually specifically for, I believe it's specifically for Twitter, is Audience, with an S at the end, not a C. And so those are just some tools that you can use. There's actually tons of different tools out there. Those are the ones that I'm most familiar with, but there are a bunch. But the thing that I'll also say about tools is, especially if you're working with a team, you want to make sure that if you're looking at tools and something, it's something that people will naturally or just they will use. Because tools, I think, sometimes have that problem where if it really disrupts your current workflow or process or things like that, it might not be as effective as it can be or you would like it to be. So sometimes like tools can be super awesome or whatever, but if it's going to be really that disruptive and if you're not going to be using it, then it just becomes a waste of time and resources.
Here
Along those lines,
I was going to say, we got a question. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. But once a year, we as a company and me as an individual, I go through basically my credit card and bank statement to see, because I know there's an online tool that you can use that tells you what you have on subscription, and I never remember to use it. But it's important to go through the tools that you have signed up for and that you may be paying for and see if you're actually using them, or if they can be merged into something that's new since you started using that one. So yeah, all right. Anyway, real question.
Okay, the question here comes from Zenohito. Is this also important when you're aiming to work with a publisher? Because the reason that Zenohito wants to work with a publisher is because they don't have time to work on community management and only time to work on the game.
Yes. Inherently, emphatically, yes.
Yep.
10 years ago, I would have said not so much. But, now one of the first questions that a publisher is going to ask when you send them your game is, how big is your Discord server? How many Twitter followers do you have? How many wish lists do you have on Steam? Yep. Whether you're going to work with a publisher or not, you need to start building that community early on.
Yeah, and I'll add to that too, because if you think about it, when you're pitching your game or you're talking to prospective publishers, like put yourself in their seat too. What are they looking at when they're looking at your game? And one of the main things and the reasons why they're asking the questions that Jay said that they would be asking for is like kind of a risk assessment. Like, and if you think about it, that the whole idea of things have been going on forever, especially if you look at like the film industry. Why do you think so many movies are made off of well-established and popular books? Because they know they have a key defined audience they could sell to immediately. So it's and that's just one of many reasons, but that's why they ask that, because if they know they have a community that this game is already made for, that just helps guarantee the success of the game, and that's ultimately what everybody wants. That's one, if not a lot more other reasons, but I would say probably a big component is just basic risk assessment. Is this going to help me get my return? And obviously it's going to help you with your return as well.
But that's not to say that a publisher is not going to work with you if you just have a game and don't have a community already. Correct. But having a community that is already built and that shows interest in the game just helps to seal the deal, to show the publisher that, oh, hey, there's already people that are interested in this. They're doing some community interactions. They're getting a lot of interest in the game already.
And Jay, could that also, because this is also something that I have always found, but I mean, could that also provide the developer a little bit more leverage too when negotiating contracts with publishers, if they have something like that compared to something where they're asking for a lot more?
I wouldn't say it's going to give you negotiating leverage, It's absolutely going to put you ahead of the person that, the other games that they're looking at that don't have a community around it. Because I mean, that's what it was like Indy said, what you're trying to do is you want to make that person's job easier. And so if that person's job is finding games and then pitching them to the Greenlight Committee, the more info and the more ammo you can give them, the better chances are they can do a good job pitching you to the Greenlight Committee. So it's not, unless you're running your own user acquisition empire on a mobile game, I'm not going to say it's going to give you that much of a negotiating leverage, but it is absolutely going to give you, a higher probability of getting to the point where you can use negotiating leverage. Because if a publisher is looking at two games that are fairly similar in genre scope and features and all of that sort of stuff, and they're only going to be able to publish one of them, and one of them already has like a whole bunch of wish lists and a Discord community and an active Twitter following, and the other one doesn't, the first one's going to get it.
Right. And you got to think like the people that work for publishers, they probably get 30 emails a day saying, hey, would you like to publish my game?
Yep.
At least.
Right.
Yeah.
So first off, you have to have a game that just looks amazing, because that's the first thing they're going to see. Mm-hmm. And then they'll just go down the line of their checklist. I mean, you kind of got to look at it from their perspective. What kind of checklist do you think they'd have? The game looks amazing. How far along is it? If it's already on Steam, or is there wish lists? When's it going to be released? What kind of community? Yeah.
Oh, I thought you were still going there.
No, I'm done. I asked what kind of community, et cetera, et cetera. There's different things.
So I mean, yeah, it's all about making their life easier, and it's one of those things that we didn't. It's not something that we started tracking until, very recently. I would say the last 6 months to a year. When we sat down and we built that infographic of what you need to put into a pitch document or a pitch deck. Community wasn't in there until recently, and because it's something that we're seeing a whole lot of. It's not. I mean, like the de facto reason is you want to go, well, people are lazy, but it's not that they're lazy. It's just that, the more that you can do as a developer to help the publisher do their job, the better off that relationship is going to be all the way around. You can't go into a healthy relationship with not only a publisher, but any partner and say, well, my job is to make the game and your job is to market it. It's a two-way street. Your job is to make the game and listen to what they're hearing from, their community and the market in general. Their job is to publish and market your game while listening to what you feel is important and the key aspects of your game. So it's a two-way street all the way. And if you can go in and show the publisher that you've been proactive from day one on building that community and trying to, get the hype going, it's simply going to make everything a whole lot easier.
Absolutely.
We got to post someone on LinkedIn. By those standards, I have no idea how so many of these indie games get published. It seems like they start with a gut feeling and then justify it with everything you outlined. And then Div chimes in with a, hi, Kappa.
What's up, as much analytics as we drop in this industry, there is still a lot of gut that goes into it. I mean, you've got companies who want to take the gut aspect of it completely out, and it's strictly an analytical thing. And yes, it can work. There's plenty of good companies that do it, that's all they focus on. But there's also a lot to be said, and indie publishers do this far more than big publishers do. It's like, man, I really like that game. I don't know exactly what it is about it right yet, but I really like it. I really like the look and the feel, or I really like, this part of the story, or just, the music and the atmosphere. There is still a lot of gut that goes into this, but it all comes down to, and it's part of the reason why there's so many publishers. Everybody wants to think that they can do a great job publishing games. And the barrier of entry to be a publisher is much lower than it's ever been. And yeah, sometimes you're going to find those teams, those publishers that just go completely on gut, and they're like, I think this is going to be good. And sometimes you get them that run on data and analytics, but I can't honestly say one is that much better than the other, unless your gut sucks. If your gut sucks, then
Well, one of the things that I do on a daily basis is just look through like coming soon games on Steam, and I'll be like, oh, that game looks good. Oh, this is already picked up by Raw Fury. I'll be like, oh, it's a year out. No, this game looks really good. And then you look and see, oh, it's published by this, or it's got picked up by that. What does Dib say? I need to find one of these guts, probably crazy as hell publishers to help me. Maybe.
That's why we constantly say send your title to as many applicable publishers as possible, because you don't know. We've had clients that were turned down by 95, 96, 97% of the publishers that we sent it to. And then one publisher was like, oh, wow, this looks pretty cool. And they end up publishing it. I mean, you can't, this is exactly why it's still very much a numbers game.
And a lot of the smaller publishers, they will want to go by, the types of games that the CEO likes. You know what I mean? So you might go to some indie publisher and they publish a multiple of different kinds of games, but the CEO maybe really, really, really loves awesome turn-based games, and that's what he personally wants to publish. And so you could go to some and have a game and they're like, then go to another one and you think it might be the same or different, but you don't know, but not realizing the CEO loves that genre of game. You just never know. I'm not talking about personal experience either. So.
Well, I will. I'll talk about
No, I totally was.
I worked with a publisher that, they preached analytics, and it's like, well, the games that we are going to publish have to fit these metrics, and they have to score, because we had a whole scoring system, for games, and they have to, we're doing this completely by analytics. And at least once we had a game that did well on the analytics or did poorly on the analytics, and the CEO was like,
I want that game.
We're still going to publish that. Like, they would go around and they're like, everybody's vote counts. Well, yeah, but yours seems to count a whole hell of a lot more than the rest of ours.
Yeah. Says the crazy thing is, among indie publishers, there are CEOs that are not only business people, but also genuine gamers with love for a certain genre or style of game. I would venture to gather that many indie publishers started because the CEOs or the founders loved video games, or maybe they were journalists, or maybe they were doing something else, or maybe they were PR people and they genuinely love video games. So
the scary thing is when you start getting into a lot of the mid-level and especially the bigger publishers, it would shock you to see how many of the decision makers of those companies don't play games.
Yeah.
But when you're dealing with the indie pubs, generally they all do. And I talk to so many publishers and I'm like, so what kind of games are you looking for? What are you looking for next year? Genres. And they give me like the most honest, but like the absolute worst answer. And it's like, well, we like to publish the games we like to play. Okay. What is that? But it really is, the sentiment from a lot of publishers. And the way that you figure that out is you just like look at what they publish. If somebody publishes a whole lot of strategy games, chances are they love strategy games. Yeah. If they, publish a lot of shooters, they probably love shooters. It's
something that makes money.
Yeah, exactly. I like playing games that generate profit.
Even if they love the type of game, they're not going to publish something that they don't think is. I mean, why would they invest in something that they don't think is going to make money? You know what I mean?
But that's where the gut comes in.
Yeah.
I mean, seriously, that is there's multiple ways to pick titles to publish. One of them is just basically purely analytics. Game comes in, it's a strategy / RPG hybrid on PC. And then you do some sort of fuzzy math where you factor in budget to quality and you pull up the Nielsen NPD Steam Spy data. You see how many units comparable titles sold. You make a projection.
The other
then
This looks fucking awesome.
yeah. then you've got the ones that are like, I'm going to go, with my gut, and I want to make sure it's a good game, but I'm mainly going to use my gut on this. And then you have stories like I'm going to show my age here. The original Deer Hunter game that came out in the 90s. Nobody in the industry in the 90s was thinking, okay, let's make a game where you hunt deer and it'll sell millions of copies. Nobody thought that. But, Stu and Jim, I can't remember Jim's last name. They looked at it from a completely different angle. They went to Walmart and said, what kind of games do your customers, what do you think they would like? And they were
They like a deer hunting.
Well, yeah, exactly. and that's what they made. And it made a shit ton of money. And now we have, obviously, 20 years later, we have all kinds of wildlife hunting simulations out there. But, there's multiple ways that these things get made. And it just comes down to the publisher. And the more you understand how that publisher makes their decision, the easier your job gets. But yeah,
what's crazy to me is the simulation genre. I mean, there's always like flight simulators and stuff like that, but then someone just like, let's do a simulator of, truck driving or where you're farming, right? And now there's freaking simulators for everything: motorcycle mechanic, car mechanic. There's simulations for everything everything. I mean, I was just watching someone, there's a lumberjack simulator yesterday. Now it's just like everywhere. And you would think, like, why would somebody want to freaking simulate a job that they hate going to every day?
Because
bouncer simulator.
It's not typically like truck drivers who buy truck driver simulator or farmers who buy farmer simulator. Because I've got friends, I grew up in the rural South. All my friends grew up on farms, and I'm like, there's like an esports league around farm simulator, and they're looking at me like, what? Why in the hell would somebody? But there is, simulations never really went away. Go back 30 years. Microsoft Flight Simulator, I had it on an Apple II.
Oh yeah. But I mean, it was really only flight simulators. You know what I mean?
All right, there was a reason behind that, though. Back then, there was only so much shelf space. So if something wasn't going to sell, 1.5 million, 10 million units, the store wasn't going to stock it. And if the store's not going to stock it, you have no way of getting it to the customer other than a mail order campaign. And so a lot of these genres died out. Hardcore, the super realistic simulators, space combat sims went away completely after Freelancer for like 10 years. And no one wanted to touch it because the retailers couldn't sell it. So what was the point? Then digital distribution came around. And now all of a sudden we can publish anything. And so then Kickstarter goes and they're like, oh, wait. Now we can get people to pay us to publish anything. And so because you had new marketing and distribution avenues, it literally rekindled a whole lot of these, genres again. And so, you look at like Aerosoft over in Germany. It's a publisher that does like literally nothing but bus driver simulators, these very, very niche, very hardcore simulators, but they make a lot of money because the niches typically, SnowRunner is another one. I haven't seen Bouncer Simulator. I'm honestly, God, surprised that hasn't existed yet. But we had a whole, in the casual boom in the 2000s, all of a sudden tycoon games came back. And you could find a tycoon game that related to any random business idea possible, because all of a sudden you didn't need to worry about getting that tycoon game in GameStop anymore. As long as it was on Big Fish or Reel or one of these digital distribution sites, you could get good sales from it. And it completely blew back up again because the desire and the love of these genres never went away. But the market capability and the distribution went away. And so when that came back, all of these genres came back too. Oh, RTS is a good one.
Yeah.
That one is still mostly like The Princess Bride. It's not fully dead. It's mostly dead. But simply by the fact that you're seeing, Microsoft reinvest in Age of Empires and Petroglyph and EA putting back out Command and Conquer and Blizzard doing whatever it is they did to Warcraft 3. Obviously, that genre has interest. And the thing is, when you have, here's my indie game, I always tell everybody an idea is worth nothing, it's the execution. So here's my idea that's worth nothing. If companies like Activision and EA and Microsoft are reinvesting their money in something like 20-year-old RTSs, you as an indie developer should know there's a market for RTS games. So go make us some good RTS games. Nothing.
Yeah.
Was that just dead?
I was noticing. No. I was looking at something. I was noticing that Zero Vapors and Divs. If you look at their, do you guys know each other?
Oh my God! They both have like pencil art logos.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So Xenohito said niches can be crazy. I had a friend that made a one-button super hard rhythm game. I was having doubts as it was very punishing. Turns out South Korea is crazy about this type of game.
Yeah. I mean,
here we go. Nightwolf. Yeah. I was going to talk about this. The fly simulator. There have been a flood of animal simulators as well now, from bird to bee to fish and so on.
Right. Yeah.
I saw The Fly. I haven't seen any of the other ones.
Oh, Divs is from One Punch Man, original webcomic.
I love One Punch Man.
Now I'm gonna look up these random simulators. All right, so yeah, it's like 1:30. We're way over schedule here.
Yeah, I'm ready for breakfast. I've had my 2 cups of coffee.
I'm ready for lunch.
Did my hand exercises.
Andrew, thank you so much, man, for coming.
Yeah, man, thank you.
Of course. Thank you guys for having me. It's been an honor and great. So
let me post these banners here really quick. So you can check out Andrew on Twitter at twitter.com/Andrew Pappas, and also follow the IGM podcast, twitter.com/IGM podcast. You can hit him up at rengenmarketing.com and check out his podcast at indiegamemovement.com. You can also check out our podcast.
Yeah. He's got a way better podcast Twitter handle than we do.
Oh,
Business Indie.
It was available. I took it.
Yeah.
Ours is Business Indie because Indie Game Business was like 1 or 2 characters too long.
Well, we could have done IGB podcast, but then we'd be copying Andrew.
Do what you need to do.
Isn't that like the most sincerest form of flattery?
Yeah.
So that in fact that
it's happening.
I'm doing
it's
good.
Happening.
I'm doing good to remember the handles that we already have.
Right. Let's see. We got a couple other comments here. I'm going to read. Bam. How does oversaturation? Well, okay, we got a question right here. How does oversaturation play into these infinite genre possibilities?
Damn you, McJohn. We were all.
Damn you, McJohn. Damn it.
Oversaturation absolutely 100% can happen, has happened, will happen. This is where, as a developer, you need to make sure you have your eye on the ball in terms of games that are coming out, games that and features that those games are going to have, and features that you assume those games are going to have. You've got to think ahead. You've got to be competitive, and you can't screw around. And I mean, like those casual tycoon games years ago, a lot of them took 6-9 months to make. If you spend 2 years making one, and it's not like the end all be all of tycoon games, you're going to be screwed because the whole market's going to pass you by the time you actually launch. So you need to be watching and seeing what else is coming and paying attention to that and making sure that your game is going to stand out from that crowd, because you have to just literally assume oversaturation is going to happen.
And what I would add to that too is when you're looking at other people, other games and stuff, look at what they aren't doing, because that's another way you can stand out. So, you go in. Look at a few other games that you're familiar with and make a grid. See everything that they're doing. If there's any things that they're not doing, whether they're talking a certain way to their community or whatever it might be, that's one other way that you can stand out.
Hito says, I'm going to make a pixel retro platformer because no one's done that.
Petting Zoo Simulator. There we go.
All right.
We're going to let Andrew go. And Jay, he needs a beer.
I do need a beer.
It's beer 30, isn't it?
Not yet. I'm good. What? No, not beer 30 yet.
It's afternoon, right? So,
oh well, it is afternoon. However, I go by my beer 30 is approximately around 4:30. So,
dang it.
Dang.
All right. Thank you guys so much for hanging out with us. We really appreciate it. We'll see you next week. Do you know who we got next week, Jay?
God, no.
I know you know. I know you know.
All right, hold on a second.
You just don't know. No.
I don't have anything lined up for Wednesday yet, but Marco Betancourt is going to be with us Friday.
Okay, that'll be cool. What are we going to talk about? You know,
running a development studio from an island off the coast of Portugal.
Okay.
In a pandemic.
Yeah.
Nice.
That'll be interesting.
Yeah.
Indie Talks Adventure Show is planned ahead or something. Hey, Andrew planned ahead like 2 weeks ahead. So,
and you see how much good that did him, because we still didn't know what we were doing when we went live. So
I knew what we were doing. I don't just because you didn't know. I was there. I knew. All right. Thank you guys so much. This will be on anchor.fm/Indie Game Podcast
and Pinterest.
And Pinterest. Apparently, Jay's going to start posting his cooking.
I've already got one up there. I've already got one of our episodes. I was, playing around with it while we were talking.
Oh, I thought you had a cooking one. I'm like, all
right. Baking and crafts. All right. See you guys later. Thank you so much.
Y'all take care. Be safe.
Again.
Bye.